Hello and welcome to today's AWCI Media Online Learning Series program, Succession Planning. Isn't it time? I'm Anne-Marie Salvatelli, AWCI's Director of Education and Foundation Programs, and I'll be your host for today's presentation. I'm joined by Chris Williams, AWCI's Director of Membership and Development Engagement, who will moderate today's chat.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Good day to everybody, and thank you for joining us. On your screen, you'll see our first poll question of the day. It should be popping up here in a second. This will help us determine how many of you are in our audience. So what we'd like to know is how many people are in your office viewing today's webinar. Please click on your selection on your screen to submit, and we'll have more questions throughout today's broadcast, so be on the lookout. Anne-Marie?
Thank you, Chris. Before we start, we have a few housekeeping items. All attendees should be on mute during the presentation. However, we ask that you please mute your phones or computer microphones as well to ensure that we keep a clear line for our presenters. Should you have a question at any time during today's broadcast, please submit it in using the question box on your GoToMeeting dashboard. We'll have a brief Q&A at the end of our presentation, and we'll make every attempt to get all of your questions answered. If you have any audio or visual issues during today's presentation, please do not hesitate to let us know using the chat function in the dashboard. You can email Chris at cwilliams@awci.org. We'll attempt to resolve any issues that may arise as quickly as possible. Today's program will be recorded and uploaded to AWCI's online program library. All attendees will receive a link to the library for access and other AWCI recordings. Next week, along with a brief follow-up survey, we'll be sending that out to you. Today's PowerPoint slides may be downloaded by clicking the handouts link in your dashboard. You should see a PDF there. Today's program centers on both elements of a successful leadership transition and how to execute that succession plan. According to AWCI research, 78% of wall and ceiling industry professionals are now 55 or older. As many leaders begin to consider transition to life outside of the wall and ceiling industry and hand over the reins of their companies to Generation X, and in some cases millennials, the questions loom: have you created conditions for the next generation of leaders to succeed, to take over and build on your legacy and create their own? Today we'll explore some of the legal issues facing a leadership transition, as well as talk to two industry leaders about how their company has successfully executed their succession plan. And we are fortunate today to welcome Craig Daley and Brittni Daley-Grishaeva from Daley's Drywall and Taping in Campbell, California. After 43 years with Daley's, Craig Daley takes the role of CEO while stepping back from day-to-day operations. Craig says, "I'm proud to see our growth as a premier metal framing, drywall, acoustical ceiling, and carpentry sub-based on my father's principles of doing it right the first time, being a good job site partner, and taking care of your employees. He looks forward to helping Daley's maintain its successful high standards while giving room for our next generation to shine." Craig is also a past president of the Association of Wall and Ceiling Industry and leading the organization from 2013 to 2014. Brittni Daley-Grishaeva is the president and chief financial officer of Daley's Drywall and Taping. Brittni takes over as president and CFO in a very exciting time for Daley's. Brittni is a graduate of the University of California, Santa Cruz, with a degree in finance and legal, has been CFO of Daley's for the past 9 years, bringing energy and optimism for the years ahead in challenging and thriving construction market. Brittni has been past president of the Construction Financial Management Association and the National Association of Women in Construction, and is a past recipient of NAWIC's prestigious Member of the Year Award. Leading off today's program is Todd Kegler, partner at the law firm of Kegler, Brown, Hill, and Ritter. Todd regularly represents clients in the areas of mergers and acquisitions, business, tax, estate planning, and in other general corporate matters. As co-chairperson of Kegler Brown's Mergers and Acquisitions Practice Group, Todd has significant experience representing clients on complex business transactions, including mergers, acquisitions, dispositions, recapitalizations, reorganizations, investments, and joint ventures. He has extensive experience with a wide variety of business and income tax planning matters relating to C corporations, S corporations, limited liability companies, and limited partnerships. Additionally, Todd focuses on advising individuals, most often wealthy entrepreneurs, with respect to estate planning matters. His experience includes structuring and implementing sophisticated estate planning strategies for clients involving GRATs, dynasty trust, intentionally defective grantor trusts, family limited partnerships, and limited liability companies. So with that, I will turn it over to Todd to get us underway. Take it away, Todd.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna Marie. That was quite a mouthful.
Yeah.
Welcome to everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Delighted to be with you. Cutting through everything that Anne Marie had outlined in terms of our background, our law firm focuses its representation primarily on closely held businesses in representing their owners. And in that capacity, we oftentimes act as outside general counsel, both to the companies and to their owners. And so business succession planning and the related tax issues involved are near and dear to our heart. When we think about business succession planning, the phrase we use with our business owner clients is what we call the elegant exit. And we call it that because exiting your business one way or another, voluntarily or involuntarily, is just a reality of life. And what our theme with our clients who are considering an exit is there are good ways to do it and bad ways to do it. And in an ideal world, what you'd like to have is, again, what we call an elegant exit. And by that, we mean it's one that satisfies our clients' goals and family goals. There are a variety of ways to exit businesses, of course. One is through family succession for those companies who have family in the business who are able and capable of running the business after the current owners desire to step down. The second broad alternative is what we call employee succession. So for businesses where either employees are not involved, where family is not involved or may not be capable or interested in running the business, there may be a group of key employees who could make sense, subject to satisfying other goals, including funding goals. And then the third broad alternative, where one of the two may not fit, are, of course, sales to third parties, whether those be strategic buyers in your industry or financial buyers such as private equity groups. And oftentimes our clients in the course of thinking through all of their alternatives, they'll examine each of those, and it really gets back ultimately, as we'll see and talk about in a few minutes, to satisfying all of the various goals that can be satisfied, with a recognition that some goals just by their nature are in conflict with one another. So there's a bit of a prioritization exercise that we get through. Before we jump into some of those strategies and so forth, this is, what we find with a lot of our clients is that this is a hard topic for a whole variety of reasons. And our clients oftentimes just frankly get stuck and put it on the back burner for a whole lot of different reasons. The general characteristics, if you look at statistics nationally, roughly 90% of all U.S. businesses are family businesses, and roughly 78% of all new jobs created in the United States, at least in the prior, there's a statistic from the period 1977 to 1990, 78% rather of all new jobs were created by family businesses. And yet 70% of family businesses fail to make it to the second generation. 87% fail to make it to the third generation. So, that leaves only 13% of the businesses that actually successfully transfer through multiple family generations. Now sometimes that's by choice. Oftentimes it's by choice. It may, for a variety of reasons, they may just decide, rather than the business actually failing or having some sort of negative consequence, it may be that one generation along the way just simply decides to sell. And nevertheless, the point is, it's a tough topic. Tough in part because there are oftentimes, particularly in family businesses, a lot of emotional conflicts that need to be addressed. and there are a lot of tax and estate planning issues that need to be addressed at the same time. And while all that's going on, most businesses have non-family members that are key to the business operation. And so coming up with a succession strategy that's satisfactory to all those different constituent groups can be challenging. Some of the common roadblocks that we see our clients get stuck on, they fall into a number of different categories. For most, it may be the first time that they've ever addressed the succession topic, particularly if it's a business that's the only business that their family has ever owned and run. It's brand new, so it's a bit scary. Second, clients oftentimes have a whole variety of goals, many of which may conflict with another. So getting very clear on those goals and which take priority is critically important and yet difficult to do. Owners oftentimes have difficult articulating what their strategy is and what their ultimate goals are. Oftentimes they're third-party agendas. As I referenced earlier, there are non-family members who may be really key employees to the organization, and they may have completely different ideas as to what's in their personal best interest. Most owners are a bit reluctant to talk with all the various constituent groups because of concerns around confidentiality, and also concerns that somehow word of a succession plan in the works may leak out to the marketplace and be received negatively by customers and vendors and so forth before you're really ready to make those decisions. Many of our owners also have a belief, whether articulated or not, that they're immortal, that they'll just do this for their entire life, and that there isn't going to be an exit at some point. Of course, it's irrational, but it's an emotional issue. Many of our clients, what they love most in life is really working on the business and in the business rather than thinking about transitioning it. So that's a stumbling block. And when they start outlining all of their goals and objectives, many owners get stuck because they feel like, well, there's no solution that satisfies everything. It's not going to be good enough, and it's just too hard to sort of think about the reality. So, and not to mention it's time consuming and costly. So what are the best ways to go about it? Well, what we recommend to our clients is you got to first spend some time really thinking strategically. We encourage our clients to start with a written goal and strategy chart. And the initial pass at this should just be designed to start writing down all the various goals, very much a brainstorming session. Don't worry too much about it. Just get it all out onto a piece of paper, all the various goals, recognizing that some may conflict with others. And then over time, you can prioritize and come up with strategies to achieve each of those. What are some of those typical goals we see? One is lifetime financial security. I'm going to come back and spend a little time on this because this is very often the most important one for the current owner. A second typical goal is you may want to reduce some financial risk over time. Best price and terms are obviously important, particularly if you're exiting through a sale rather than some sort of gift. Business continuity and making sure you got the right successors to the business and that will continue the legacy of the business, continue to grow it, continue to provide opportunities for all the valued employees is usually on most owners' wish list. Maintaining confidentiality as you go through the process is usually a goal. Making sure that you're thinking about what the impact of any succession plan is to the other non-family employees is generally an important item. There are tax-related issues, so typically you need to coordinate with your existing estate plans with a focus on minimizing taxes, whether they be transaction, estate planning related taxes or income taxes. You need to think about what does the business look like when we've completed the succession, and is the business going to be financially able to continue to fund its future growth and protect the next generations. Family harmony is one of those issues that is difficult oftentimes to think and talk about, but it can be a huge impediment if the owner is feeling like, boy, this could be a mess if I move this business ownership in the wrong way, and I may have one sibling upset with another, or all the kids mad at me, and so maintaining family harmony is important. And of course, providing for any taxes that will result from the succession plan. Identifying how those taxes will be funded is also important. I said that I was going to come back and talk about for what most of our clients is the number one objective, which is most of our clients are not about to give up ownership and control until they first are sure that they're comfortable that they've satisfied their own lifetime financial needs for themselves and their spouse, if the spouse is still alive. Until they've satisfied that objective, nothing else is going to get done. And part of that we found is that you can't just talk about it in a vacuum. We really need to spend some time doing some thoughtful financial modeling and forecasting of the business to make sure that whatever succession plan you implement is going to result in sufficient cash flow on an after-tax basis to the owner to make sure that that owner is going to be comfortable and satisfied. Part of that we oftentimes recommend to our clients is going out and securing a formal valuation from an appraisal firm. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is if you've never done it before, you may have some sense of what your business is worth, but what you think it might be worth may be very different than what the marketplace would say it's worth. So getting clear on what the real value is versus perceived value is important. It's especially important and essential if you are going to incorporate estate planning and gifts into your overall succession plan, because you need to know what the value is, because taxes will be implicated. And so hiring a good business appraiser is really important for that purpose and getting a market check. The other reason that most of our clients would benefit from going out and getting a valuation when they start this is it helps them get a market check. Even if the thought process is, I'm not going to sell this business to a third party, knowing what the price could be if you decided to go that route is very helpful in terms of the overall thought process and clearing up any sort of mental roadblocks. The other major goal where we spend a lot of time helping our clients work through is how best to minimize family friction. This is one of these areas where there is no right answer. People are people, humans are humans and have human emotions, and every family dynamic is different. A couple of common themes that we found helpful as a goal is try to come up with an overall plan that family members will at least perceive as being fair. That may or may not mean equal in terms of value, but fairness helps to minimize family friction, where most plans will result in each family member receiving something in the process. It may not be ownership of the family-owned business, but there may be something else of value, either economic value or intangible personal value that can help sort of satisfy some of those goals. And as an example, we have a number of clients that own real estate in their business, and it may be that you pass the ownership of the real estate, which is just a passive income holding, onto family members who are not in the active management of the business, and they benefit from ownership of that and an income stream that's payable by the operating agreement, or by the operating company rather, where kids that are in the business that are going to have ongoing management may then, get the stock of the business. We found it's often helpful to those who are actually in the management role of the business to not have, where possible, other family members involved in the ownership, because over time it tends to develop friction points where the family members that are in the business are feeling like their blood and sweat and tears, so to speak, is not, is being absorbed in part by other family members who are not actively engaged in the business. So how do you plan for success? I'm going to give you, we have a short amount of time, so I'm not going to try to make any of you estate and gift tax experts, but I want to at least share with you a few high-level concepts, because to the extent that you're going to gift a portion of the ownership of the business to family members, you need to understand at least the basics of how the gift tax laws and estate tax laws may impact that. Because it can jeopardize, depending on the overall value, it can jeopardize your ability to continue to pass ownership of the business through multiple generations. In general, when do we want to worry about it? Well, anytime gift taxes apply, anytime that there's a transfer of property for a price that is less than fair market value. Fair market value, again, is one of those, what's a willing buyer willing to pay to a willing seller, both being under no obligation to sell. The best way, and if you're going to have taxable gifts potentially, that's a place where for sure you want to get a formal valuation that is done by a qualified appraiser that can be backed up and supported in any gift tax return that you file. Likewise, transfers to employees, sometimes people don't think about this, but if there is a non-family member employee who is going to receive some stock in the business, if you make a transfer to that employee for less than fair market value, rather than a gift tax, it's likely to trigger an income tax. What the IRS says is that to the extent an employee gets something of value that they don't pay for, that's essentially as if the company had made a taxable cash bonus payment to them, and the employee turned around and used the amount of that bonus payment to turn around and buy that stock at fair market value. And of course, on that deemed bonus payment, the employee is going to pay income taxes. So you need to be careful about planning when you have non-family member employees, because there are income tax issues that apply rather than gift tax issues. In the gift tax world, the donor, meaning typically mom or dad, are the ones that are going to pay any report and pay any gift taxes rather than the donee, again, typically children. So you need to be aware of that. The maximum federal estate tax rate is currently 40%, so it's a high rate. Many states still have their own separate state estate taxes. I practice in Ohio. Thanks to Governor Kasich, we no longer have an Ohio estate tax, but the state level estate tax does apply, so you need to take that into consideration in any of your planning. And if any assets that you own at the time of your death do benefit from a step up in income tax basis, not that you want to plan in that manner, but just so you know. Taxable gifts. What is a taxable gift? It's a gift during your lifetime, of course, rather than at death. There are a number of good reasons from a tax planning standpoint to think about moving ownership through taxable gifts. One is you move it at today's value and you move the future appreciation outside the donor's taxable estate and into the estates of the younger generation. To the extent any gift taxes are paid, it's not the end of the world, because when mom or dad pay a gift tax, those gift tax dollars are removed from their estate, thereby minimizing or lessening later estate taxes. We also are living in a world today where we have historical high exemption amounts. I'll come back to that in a moment. You should know that any transfers, any gifts to a spouse are eligible for an unlimited marital deduction as long as you ring certain required tax bells. So anything you move to a spouse, you can do it without worry about having a potential gift tax. To the extent you're making gifts to other family members, such as children, though, they are going to be subject to the application of a taxable gift. But the good news here is that the current federal exemption amount is $11.4 million per individual. So a married couple, when you add those two together, you can transfer the first almost $23 million down to children before, and use up your exemption and your gift tax filings before you actually have to start worrying about writing a check to Uncle Sam for gift taxes. In addition, you can make what are called annual exclusion gifts, which are $15,000 per year per donor and per donee, without even having to report a gift tax. But it is important when you deal with non-marketable assets like stock that you have a good sense of what those values are. I'm going to fast forward through a couple of these. Again, it's $15,000 per donee and per donor, or $30,000 per couple, per married couple if they're splitting gifts. So why is all of this relevant? Well, there are a number of strategies that we've used with clients to successfully move, in situations where mom and dad are relatively satisfied that they've taken care of their own financial security and they're willing to give away some of the value to their kids without expecting, a full purchase price payment back on return. You can often make gifts or even sales, so part sale, part gift, of minority interest to the next generation in a way that you can leverage the discount that an appraiser can give you for non-marketable, non-voting types of stock to the next generation. There are some tricks that you'll want to work with your estate planning lawyer to make sure that you don't run afoul of some rules under Section 2036, which can cause the assets to be re-included in your estate. But assuming you don't have that, you can move it. And to the extent that you're actually selling stock for fair market value as opposed to making gifting, those aren't gift tax events at all. But you nevertheless, even in a sale context, you may want to file a gift tax return to report that non-gift sale to the IRS for the simple purpose of getting the statute of limitations running. So a couple different strategies I just wanted to share with you briefly. One is what's called a GRAT, which stands for Grantor Retained Annuity Trust. This is a strategy where mom and dad could set up a Grantor Retained Annuity Trust for the benefit of their kids if they want them to become the ultimate owners of the business. They make a gift of the stock to that trust in return for the trust paying them an annual annuity. To the extent the stock then appreciates in excess of the annuity transfers, at the termination of the GRAT, all the value, including the value of the stock, passes tax-free down for the benefit of the kids. If the assets do not appreciate, so if there was some downturn in the business, all that happens is the stock then gets returned to mom and dad. So it's a bit of a heads I win, tails I tie plan that we've used with great success for a lot of our clients. A similar variation to that is what's called a sale to a grantor trust. It functions like a grantor retained annuity trust in some ways, but the owner does not need to survive the term of the, like you do in a GRAT, to make it work. The strategy with this, it's a bit strange, but it's called an intentionally defective grantor trust because of a couple of things. One is, for income tax purposes, it's treated as if the trust doesn't exist. So it would be considered, for example, as if dad still owned the stock. But for estate and gift tax purposes, it's treated as if as a separate legal entity, and so that any assets that are owned by that trust get outside of dad's estate, which is part of what we're trying to accomplish. So a transaction would look something like this. You would first recapitalize the company. I'm going to put on a laser pointer here quickly, just to show how it works, where you could recapitalize the company, create a class of non-voting stock, get a valuation, a discount of, in this example, roughly 30%. You sell, so you start with a total enterprise value of 20 million. You sell 98% of the stock at a 30% discount. So the sale price would be this 13.75 million figure. And then you use, once the trust owns the stock, it takes the annual distributions, the stock dividends, and uses those to make annuity payments back to John here in this example. That sale, because it's between John and a grantor trust that's disregarded for income tax purposes, it's as if the sale transaction never happened, meaning there's no capital gain on the transaction. And yet we get the value of the stock outside of dad's estate, and it's replaced with this stream of income. It's a bit of a complicated strategy, but that's the general gist. And the end goal is first, you make 30% of the value effectively disappear through this discounting technique. And secondly, then you get all the future appreciation outside of the estate. There are other alternatives, of course. We won't dive into detail, but depending on clients' goals, you can run through a variety of different alternatives. Just a couple of real-life scenarios. I think I'll just touch on a couple to illustrate the point. First is what we've referred to on this slide as owner one. We had a client who died, was survived by his wife. They owned three separate businesses in three separate industries. The total value at the time of dad's death was in excess of $100 million. Mom was not involved in any of the businesses, but all 8 of the children, it's a big Catholic family, all 8 of the children were involved. And question was, how is mom then going to plan? Dad never completed his succession plan, so now he left it for his wife. And so what they ended up doing is they did the sale to the defective trust that we described on the previous slide. They ended up adopting that strategy. They sold all of those family interests to that trust in exchange for what's called a self-canceling installment note. The sale was made pro rata to a trust such that all the children ended up owning an equal share of each business. But the children were essentially responsible for dividing up management and control of the business in a way that would be satisfactory to Mom, and she made them come up with that plan before she implemented the strategy. Unfortunately for her, she then, after implementing the strategy, died about a year after the transaction due to some complications. But when she set it up, the silver lining, if there was one, was that she had sold in exchange for what's called a self-canceling installment note, which essentially said that we're going to pay a certain amount to Mom each year for a fixed term, but if she dies during the term, the note's canceled and it goes away, and which is in effect what happened. There are similar variations on that sort of theme that can be used to make those sorts of succession planning transfers. So happy, I think my time is up, Anne-Marie. Happy to hand over control or take any questions.
Okay, well, thank you, Todd. And if anyone, I don't see any questions yet in the box, so if anyone has any, please feel free to type those in. And Chris, if you'd like to take over.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Again, as a reminder, if you have questions, submit them right now. We're going to the chat portion, question and answer portion, with Craig and Brittni here in a second, so please feel free to ask questions throughout. Now that we've heard a little bit about the legal and tax implications of the succession planning and transition process, it's time to get the perspective of a contractor who's successfully gone through that transition. Daley's Drywall and Taping recently underwent a successful leadership transition from Craig to his daughter, Brittni. Many steps made up that transition process, and both Craig and Brittni are here to shed a little bit of light into how the process evolved and how they navigated some of the issues that Todd's mentioned. Craig and Brittni, welcome.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
First question, Craig, I'll start with you due to seniority here. What type of ownership model is in place right now at Daley's? Simple question here. And also, did the potential tax and financial implications impact any transition planning?
Sure. Well, hello, everybody. Yeah, Daley's is an S corporation where I'm the majority shareholder, and then my daughter Brittni is a minority shareholder. We're in the process of Brittni becoming the majority shareholder. I'm going to retain the minority shares for my son Brent to sell down in the future. We're setting up the agreement as that will be paid off over 10 years, depending on profitability and the ability to pay. Really need to spread the payments out because I realize, we just can't break the golden goose and have the company have any cash issues.
And when you decided, Craig, that it was time to start that transition, how did you go about determining what the path forward should be? What was the first step in that transition?
It kind of started back when I was 48 years old. We bought some property that I realized was going to be, paid off when I'm 68.
So a couple years ago.
Well, I'm 63 now. So, and at that time, kind of looking forward, I go, well, 20 years, I'll be set. I'll probably be wanting to be out of the business. I'll work from 48 to 58, and then at 58, I'll start selling the company over a period of 10 years. I'm slowly working less and fade down. When I got to 58, I guess I realized maybe I wasn't as old as I thought, and also we didn't really have, Brittni wasn't ready. We really didn't have anybody specifically in mind to, at 58. So I realized, boy, if I'm gonna get this done at 68 or some distant date in the future, I'm gonna have to start getting a little bit more serious. By chance, almost, we got a little bit overcrowded, and Brittni moved into my office. That turned out to be a real blessing in disguise because it really started at kind of an intense training period, I think. She had already been CFO and was just excelling on the whole financial side of the business, but she got kind of a crash course being one-on-one. in my office there. Let's see. That over the next 5 years, she continued to excel. And looking back, I think I'm glad I started at 48, even though I didn't quite, follow my exact plan at 58. But my advice is just to start as early as you can, as the years do creep up on you.
Craig, you mentioned that it was a blessing in disguise when Brittni moved into the office. So, Brittni, I'll ask you a question here. How have you prepared for this moment? Is there anything specific, besides obviously moving into your dad's office, that you sought out to be ready for taking over in this role?
Yeah, thank you. I think being a family member growing up in the business played a big part. First of all, growing up in drywall elevated the way that I view our trades, and I didn't realize how much I was learning through osmosis, primarily about our company culture and values, but also some more specific things such as conflict resolution and negotiating strategy and sales tactics. My training began way before I think I came to the company, and when I chose my degree in business and finance, I wasn't at that time planning on coming to the family business, but I knew I wanted to be in business or finance in some capacity. And then after coming to the business, my training got a little more serious, and I started as controller and then became CFO. And as many CFOs in small and mid-sized businesses are, I had a broad array of duties and outside of finance, crossing over into sales and operations, which made me learn a lot more about the business. And I agree, actually, sharing an office with my dad did help a lot in learning through how he would handle situations.
Awesome. And I'll ask a follow-up question to that, Brittni. You're a finance major from UC Santa Cruz. So you also mentioned growing up around the business, that experience. Put you on the spot here. Which was more valuable, the degree or basically the on-the-job side of it?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, honestly, I think both helped a lot. I wouldn't be where I'm at today if I hadn't grown up in the business or if I hadn't had a finance degree. That being said, for the people out there that are looking for young people that their values align, they might not have the opportunity to have a son or daughter take over, but I would look for people that have the same values as you, that you would teach to your son or daughter. I don't know if that answers the question, but
it's actually a perfect lead into the question here after Craig. In looking for your successor, obviously you had Brittni there, so it's kind of built in. But what process did you follow, and was she the logical first choice with her involvement in the family business, or did you look outside of the family system?
No, I guess I consider myself fortunate having, Brittni and Brent, my son, and just a really solid, smart executive team that's been able to, get work without me. Brittni, has values that I think I tried to carry on from my dad, and I think that was a big decision for me. Like she said, I guess we've been grooming each other, and I've been grooming her since she was 1 year old.
Since birth, basically, Brittni, you're born into it. I think a lot of us have been that way. So, because how did you come to that decision to take a step back from the day-to-day operations, and when did you come to that decision to say, okay, I don't necessarily need to be involved in those day-to-day decisions? And what factors did you weigh, and what influenced you in that? Was it the success of the business right now, or was it also the team that you have in place that helped influence that?
Yeah, definitely a lot of things lined up well. I've been kind of stepping back from day-to-day operations the last 5 years, getting less and less involvement in specific job estimating and specific project management. Being involved with AWCI kind of gets you out and about out of the office and kind of forces you to learn to delegate things. What probably was kind of a defining moment last January, and Brittni came to me and said, "Dad, I got this. We got this." And I kind of stepped back and said, "You know what? I think they do." As I looked at, I realized that I'm going to be okay financially, and then I kind of thought of, boy, if I'm going to sell a business, let me put the shoes on of being a buyer, and would I want to, if I held on for the next 3 years in a great economy and sold it at the top, and then here comes, Brittni or anybody buying to, into a downside. That's got to be a bit unfair and a bit demotivating. So I thought, this is just a good time, and she was ready, and I think I was ready. And the dad I got this probably turned the corner for me.
One thing, if I can just piggyback on that slightly, I think the key word in there for me was Dad, we got this. It was really me and my executive team here at Daley's. I'm not the only leader in the company, and we've grown a lot the last few years, and I couldn't do it without my team. We really jive together very well.
So this question's for both of you. Would you say that it was a kind of a natural progression, a natural identification of when the time was right?
I think so, yeah.
No,
yeah, absolutely.
We'll come back a little bit, Craig, what you mentioned here towards the end here. I kind of have a specific question for both of you. But for Brittni, I want to explore a little bit about the generational differences and how they shape both in terms of your leadership styles. Being a late Gen Xer, early millennial, how did it help shape your leadership style, if it did at all? And how did that help? And if it did it create any issues during the transition? Let's see, how do I phrase this politically correct? With previous generations at the company?
Yeah, thanks. Well, as we all know, we don't all fit into the typical boxes of the generational stereotypes. Most people who know me would say I show more characteristics of the boomer generation than the millennials. Because of this, I haven't ran into the typical clashes that other people in my generation may have experienced. My advice to the millennials out there would be to transcend your generational stereotype, identify which characteristics from previous generations you want to adopt, and make them your own. Now, that being said, I'm not saying being a millennial is something I'm not proud of. It goes the other way too, right? There's a lot of great things about being millennial, and boomers or Gen Xers can take on those traits as well. Some examples are we have a flexible work environment, we are more focused on results than office hours, and we ask for frequent feedback and give and ask for frequent feedback. An example of that is all the executives at my company have attended the FMI leadership course, which is a course I would highly recommend to any of the leaders, either currently in a leadership role or people coming into a leadership role. One of the principles they teach are constantly asking for plus delta feedback, which is asking for a positive and something you can improve on. And so being open to the feedback is something millennials are known for, and I think it's been a very powerful tool in me coming into leadership role, and it's helped shape my leadership style.
And has that culture kind of developed at Daley's over time, or was it with the transition period, so to speak?
I think we've always had some level of feedback, but I think we've had more feedback since the executive team, including myself, have gone to the FMI leadership, and we try to do more constant. And there's been a lot more, other than that, there's been a lot more research coming out about the benefits.
I'd be remiss also if I don't mention, Craig, that your check for promoting AWCI involvement will be in the mail later this week. Brittni will have the get in contact with you as well.
It will be my first check from them.
So Brittni, I do want to touch on a little bit. As a young leader, how have you balanced your role now, leading the company with family and personal time?
Yeah, great question. Luckily for me, work-life balance has always been a big part of our company culture when I came on board. And it is my job to lead the company culture to continue doing the things that have been done and also improve on them. It's not always easy to balance family and personal. Sometimes I want to work late just to get up a little bit more caught up, but it's okay to do that every once in a while as long as I keep my eye on the bigger picture, which is keeping the company culture in mind.
Definitely. And so I'll wrap up, and we have a couple questions here from the audience that we'll get to in a second, but I want to ask both of you this question. And Craig we talked about a little bit earlier, coming and sharing the office, and this is for both of you again. how do the dynamics work of having both of you in the office now, and now that Brittni, you're officially president through this transition? Essentially, has there been any butting of heads or second guessing in the decision-making front from one generation to the next?
Yeah, great question, Chris. So since we're father-daughter...
No need to accuse. This is actually a fun question, so I just wanted to... Knowing how leadership styles differ in my own relationship with my father as a business owner, that's kind of a personal question to ask you all.
Well, not all family businesses work, right? And there's a reason for that, and we all know that. But since we're a father-daughter, our values and our vision for the company generally align. So we don't butt heads on many of the really big picture or the really important values. It's a benefit of working with someone that has the same values as you, as I mentioned before, whether they're a family member or not. That being said, no, we don't always agree, and when we don't agree, it's important to keep our personal and professional relationships separate. Basically, in those situations, he's my boss, not my dad, and I do respect the hierarchy of that. It's difficult for some people to separate the business and personal, especially when in a time of if a conflict arises, but it's a necessary skill to develop if you're going to work with your family.
And I guess I would just, add, I think our personalities mesh pretty well. I'm not a my way or the highway, generally kind of a personal. I worked closely with my brother for 30 years, and we didn't always agree. But the one thing that kind of worked was you are the captain of the ship, and I may not agree, and we can still go have Thanksgiving together afterwards. Going forward, right now in a good economy, the decisions and the thing, mostly it's all upbeat, and there's a lot of good things, hiring and getting more work and that type of stuff is real positive. I think it's going to, where it'll get tricky down the line could be as recessions come and ugly decisions have to start being made, and that's where our challenges will probably be.
Mm-hmm. And Craig, I'll ask you this question real quick. You said there's a 10-year plan to start, and you're I think a little bit more than halfway through the succession transition side of it. Have you found ways to occupy your free time, or has that been a challenge?
Yeah, no, it's people say I don't ever had time to work.
Honey-do list from Jackie Daley.
Oh my gosh, it's really just the official. The first of the year was official, so here we are 6 weeks into it, and I guess I'm one of those guys who's going to say I don't even know I ever had time to work.
One of the things, and I think that's worth exploring for some psychologists, sociologists down the road, is going to be what that effect of the baby boomer generation retiring, how they fill their time. I've met a couple of people that have gone through this process that have actually struggled with that and have gone back in the workforce. So that's part funny question, part serious question. So thanks for taking the time to answer that one, Craig.
Sure.
All right, Todd, are you still there? We've got a question for you, sir.
I am.
All right. This question comes in from our audience. Is a self-distinguishing or canceling note subject to tax when it self-extinguishes?
It is not. It's a great question. So the concept of it, and there are some IRS rules and regulations that relate to it. There are two different types, really three different types of notes that you could take back if you're to sell stock to a family member, for example. One is just your traditional old straight promissory note with a fixed term, and whether you amortize payments or whether you have interest-only payments with a balloon at the end of whatever the term is. That's just like any other promissory note that you might see. And if the holder of that note, typically mom or dad, were to die before the note is fully paid off, the remaining principal value of the note becomes an asset in their estate, and as payments are continued to be made, they would recognize tax just like any other note. The two other types of notes that estate planners use in these sorts of situations, one's called a private annuity, which is probably what it sounds like to you, which is that it's a form of note that has a negotiated term, and again, there are some IRS regulations on how you set the interest rate with that sort of annuity note. But the basic idea is that rather than having a fixed term for the note, note payments of some amount are made for the remaining life of the holder of the note, again, typically mom or dad. And that's, it's based on some IRS regulations, as well as, of course, mom or dad's age and life expectancy. And what happens is if mom or dad die, the terms of the note just simply expire, and that's it. There are no payments. A variation of that private annuity note is the one that I referred to in my presentation, which is called a self-canceling installment note. That has a little bit of the best of both worlds. The downside of a private annuity note from a tax planning standpoint, and from, frankly, the purchaser standpoint, which are typically the kids, is that you got to keep making payments for as long as mom and dad are alive. Satisfies mom and dad's objective probably to continue their income stream, but if they outlive their life expectancy, the transaction can get very expensive for the kids. The self-canceling installment note, in contrast, says the term of the note will expire at the earlier of mom or dad's death, again, whoever the holder of the note is, or a fixed term, such as 7 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever the case may be. And because of that self-canceling feature, the IRS will make you make a calculation, and again, there are IRS tables and rules on that are partly based on life expectancy, partly based on current interest rates that get published. But they basically ask you to add what's called a mortality premium to whatever the regular interest rate would be. And the mortality premium means that you're going to have a higher interest rate on that note to reflect the fact that there's a possibility mom or dad may die. And when structured properly, if you were to die, mom or dad were to die in my example, before the fixed maturity date of the note just simply terminates and it goes away. So in that one case study that I ended my presentation with, mom was in perfectly good health. She took back a self-canceling installment note with an initial face value equal to the full fair market value purchase price. And we had a term on the note that was out about 7 or 10 years. I don't recall the exact time. That had she lived that full 7 or 10 years, she would have got paid the full principal plus a very high interest rate. Just by happenstance, she ended up being in an automobile accident, somewhat tragically, a year later, and the note expired. And so the only payments that were made on that note by the kids were interest for a year and the first principal payment, and that was it. And then the note goes away. And so we effectively moved about 98% of the full value of these businesses, which were valued even with discounts at over 100 million. It all got moved down to the 8 kids in trust for their benefit, essentially free of all state and gift taxes. I mean, we couldn't have, planned for a tragic accident like that, but it was always a possibility, which is why we structure it in the way we did. And that just gets, there's no tax on it, income or estate or gift.
One more question from the audience, Todd. What are the pros and cons of ESOPs?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, just to describe an ESOP generally, an ESOP is, the best analogy I can give you is an ESOP, first of all, stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan. The best analogy I can give for you is it's a bit like a 401k plan that you may set up for the benefit of your employees, except that rather than having employees pick, typically a bucket of, publicly traded stocks or bonds or index funds as the asset, the sole asset of the ESOP plan, which would be managed typically by a third-party trustee, is the value of the company stock. And that trustee enters into a transaction with the existing owners in which the existing owners typically sell 100% of the stock to the ESOP trustee. And typically those deals get financed partly for an amount of a cash down payment, and the cash down payment is typically equal to whatever cash the company has on its balance sheet at the time of closing, plus whatever money the company may be able to go out and borrow from a bank, a lender, and that's the down payment. The sellers then typically finance the rest of the purchase price. So a general rule of thumb, all businesses are different, of course, but you may have a cash down payment of, say, 25%, and the remaining 75% gets paid to the sellers through a promissory note payable by the company with a fairly high interest rate, because those notes tend to get subordinated to the senior debt. You tend to see interest rates that are in the 10 to 12% range on those seller notes. The advantage that I would say is they're very tax efficient ways to sell ownership of the company to your employees, particularly in situations where your employees don't have any financial means to actually fund a purchase price. You can get it, especially with S-Corps, they work really well, because when the stock is owned by an ESOP, the ESOP itself is a tax-exempt entity. So if you think about how S-Corps get taxed, they're flow-through entities. So when all the taxable income of the S-Corp gets allocated to the ESOP, and the ESOP itself is tax-exempt, if you think about it, nobody's paying any income taxes on company earnings. What does that allow to do? Well, in the structuring of the transaction, when you don't have the tax drag associated with the business, it means that the company ability to repay debt is, increased by roughly 40%. So it can pay off bank debt very quickly, and it can also pay back the seller notes quickly as well. And so it's a very tax efficient way to move ownership to the employees. And as long as the sellers are willing to stay involved with the business, which most will want to, as long as they got seller notes out there because they're taking creditor risk, it's an attractive way to get paid full value with a healthy interest rate over a period of time. A couple of downsides to ESOPs. One is they're governed by ERISA law, so there are some regulatory complications that you have to be sensitive to. You need to make sure that you get good advisors that are experienced in ESOP transactions to assist you because of the regulatory nature. There's some onerous penalties and compliance issues. You don't want to do them wrong. The other thing is that ESOPs, the ultimate beneficiaries are everybody that is in all of your full-time employees. You can set certain, requirements around how long they have to be there. But typically, if your employees are there for more than a year and are full-time employees, they're going to be participants under the ESOP plan. They will share in their share of that stock based on their W-2 payroll differences, with some caps and some limitations. So one downside is most businesses have a more select group of key employees that are really drivers of value. It's not always the case, but that we see that quite common. Whereas ESOP, the ownership is very broad-based. So usually that is perceived as a negative. The trade-off or the way to solve for that, though, is you can do some other things for your key employees to make sure that they're properly incented to continue to drive value. You can implement what are called stock appreciation rights plans for a group. There's some limitations on how much value of the business you can move in that way. It's typically 10 to 15% of the kind of equity related value that you can do. But those are the biggest downsides that I see. The other downside, if you're selling to a third party, ESOPs are negotiated transactions where the ESOP trustee is going to go out and hire a valuation firm to value the business. And by law, the ESOP trustee cannot pay more than fair market value. And so they look to a qualified appraiser to give them a valuation opinion as to what that value is. So when you do a transaction in that manner, rather than going out to market and maybe having an investment banker on your side, you kind of eliminate the possibility of a spike purchase price offer. If you got, for example, two strategic buyers out there that just really wanted you, sometimes buyers overpay. And so you won't see an overpayment scenario with an ESOP.
Fabulous. Well, we would like to thank Todd, Craig, and Brittni for joining us today and sharing their insights into how to make the succession process as smooth as possible. As a reminder, this program was recorded, and you'll receive a link to AWCI's online program library, as well as a link to a brief post-event survey early next week. In addition, we will also have some great resources available through the Foundation of the Wall and Ceiling Industry, which you may access by visiting awci.org/foundation. So thank you everyone for your time today. And one other highlight is our next AWCI Media Online Learning Series program, Gen Z, Managing the Cultural and Communications Gap Between Generations, will take place on Thursday, May 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And be on the lookout for an email with details on how to register in early April. And on behalf of the Association of the Wall and Ceiling Industry, thank you for joining us today and have a productive day. Thank you all.